He proposed with a ring inside a linen napkin. 6 months later, he left me with a manila envelope and a heartbeat I hadn't told him about yet. How do you tell the father of your child that he's walking away from both of you and doesn't even flinch? I came home from a double shift still in scrubs. The front door clicked softly behind me. Boston in late October meant cold air and brittle light, but inside our penthouse everything was too still, too arranged. The kettle was hissing, not boiling. The coat he wore when he traveled was missing. His suitcase gray leather with brass latches stood zipped beside the bar cart. He stood across the kitchen counter, a travel folder in one hand, his phone in the other. He didn't smile, didn't move. "You're early," he said. I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the test. I'd looked at it 5 times since my break at the clinic. 2 lines. Clear, immediate. I set it on the marble counter between us. His gaze dropped. No reaction. He set down his phone, pressed 2 fingers to the plastic stick, then pushed it gently back toward me. "Claire?" That was all he said. "I'm pregnant," I said. I tried to keep my voice even. Professional even. Like I was telling a patient their blood pressure was high. Or asking a nurse for help rolling a gurney. But I wasn't in scrubs anymore. Not really. I was in this moment with the man I loved, and I was telling him our lives had just changed. He exhaled, long and rehearsed. "I didn't expect this," he said. "But it doesn't change what I have to do." "What you have to do?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He nodded toward the folder. "It's all arranged. I leave tomorrow night." "For what?" "For Singapore," he said. "The wedding's next week." I blinked. My vision narrowed. Like my body knew to shut off sound before my brain understood the words. "Wedding." "Lena Hargrove," he said. Like it was obvious. Like it was business. "My father closed the merger once we finalized the date." "You're marrying someone else," I said, just to hear it out loud. "To close a deal." "It's bigger than that," he said. "It's about legacy. Leverage. It's not just emotional." "But this is," I said, touching my stomach. Silence. His eyes dropped again. "You'll be taken care of," he said. He pushed the folder across the counter. "There's a separate account in your name. I already moved the funds. No one will question anything." I didn't look at the folder. I looked at him. At the man who used to make me midnight pasta. Who used to kiss my shoulder when he thought I was asleep. Now he couldn't look me in the eye. I turned toward the window. The city lights below blinked yellow and red like traffic warnings. He tapped something into his phone. A voice came through the speaker. Janelle. His assistant. She was confirming the car. She was always confirming something. "I'll call once I land," he said. I didn't respond. He walked past me. No kiss. No touch. Just the sound of shoes on tile and the quiet close of the elevator. That night, I sat on the couch with a bowl of cereal I couldn't taste. The test still on the counter, the folder still unopened. I refreshed the Bloomberg homepage out of habit, and there it was. Asterisk, asterisk, tech merger. Sealed by marriage. Asterisk, asterisk. There was a photo. Ethan in a tailored navy suit. Lena smiling up at him with one hand on his chest. They looked real. Polished. Like they belonged on a glossy magazine page. And I realized. I wasn't just discarded. I was erased. I didn't scream, didn't confront, didn't even reply. There was no time. No home to go back to. No space to fall apart. So I did what I knew how to do. I scrubbed in. I delivered a baby that night. Not mine. Just another life pushed into a world on fire. Then I locked myself in the janitor's closet and cried beside the mop bucket. Not because of the delivery, but because my son was kicking hard. And I still had 2 hours left on shift. They said I'd be taken care of. That someone like me, top of her class, loyal, careful, would never be left behind. But there I was, 7 months pregnant, sleeping in the on-call room with my backpack under my head and a Target throw blanket Janelle found on clearance. April 2020. Boston was a ghost town. The hospital lights buzzed like they were the only things still alive. Outside sirens, inside too many goodbyes whispered through iPads. I wasn't thinking about baby names. I was thinking about ventilator shortages, about saving a kid's spleen, about how to sneak crackers from the break room without vomiting. Janelle was the only one who noticed. She'd drop off prenatal vitamins with my takeout order. Tell me to sit down between surgeries. Tell me I looked like crap, but in a nice way. "You're glowing, girl," she smirked once in a radioactive kind of way. She made me laugh. That night it hurt to laugh. I remember one shift, a pediatric trauma came in. 4-year-old hit by a truck. No family allowed inside. I held her hand until anesthesia took her under. Then I picked up the scalpel and stitched a body I couldn't bear to lose. Micah kicked again, as if reminding me he was next. I hadn't told Ethan yet. I hadn't told anyone really. Vivian Caldwell, his mother, somehow knew. She never called. But every 2 weeks a brown paper box arrived. No return label. Inside, a wooden teething toy, a handwritten recipe for oatmeal lactation cookies, a second-hand parenting book from the 80s. No note, just presents. Micah came into the world between 2 emergencies. Just like I did. It happened on a Thursday. The OR schedule was backed up. 2 traumas, 1 ruptured appendix, and a toddler with a twisted bowel. I was already 10 hours into a 12-hour shift. The mask was soaked. My lower back screamed. But there were no backups. No one to hand the scalpel to. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't say I think I'm in labor. Didn't even pause when my water broke because I was in scrubs. And everything's wet in scrubs anyway. I finished the case. Told the nurse I needed a break. She looked at my face. She knew. Janelle was the one who ran down the hall, screaming something about OB now. She was laughing and crying at the same time. I gave birth in OR 4. Not the maternity ward. Not the soft-lit room with music and scented pads. Just a cold table, 3 residents still in their PPE, and a nurse from pediatrics, who held my hand and said, "You're doing great, Dr. Clarkson." Micah didn't cry at first, just blinked. Wide, solemn eyes like he already knew the world was complicated. Then he screamed. And I laughed. Through tears. Through blood. Through everything I didn't get to plan. Janelle stayed with me that night. She snuck in cafeteria cookies. Said they were awful. Said I looked like hell. Tucked the Target blanket around my feet. I asked if she thought Ethan would ever ask about Micah. She didn't answer. Just kissed my forehead and said, "You did it, Mama." Some mothers frame birth photos. Mine came with a surgical report. Blood type AB. Length 19.5 inches. Weight 6 pounds 2 ounces. Time of birth 0:36 a.m. Just another patient. Just another life. But this one was mine. He entered the world not to applause but to the sound of my pager going off for the next emergency. Micah took his first steps right next to my research binder. He wobbled forward, 2 fingers sticky with peanut butter, 1 sock missing, and landed with both palms on a diagram of a fetal heart. I laughed. Not loudly. Just a quiet exhale that surprised even me. My son was walking. I was too. In a different way. The spring after Micah turned 1, I started sketching again, but not nursery designs or diaper trackers. I outlined a proposal on pediatric cardiac innovations scribbled between bites of oatmeal and Lego bricks under my chair. The idea had lived in my head for years. But now it had a heartbeat. Because mine was sitting cross-legged sorting toy organs by color. Vivian never called, never asked to visit. But one day, a box arrived Tiffany blue. Inside a child science kit, real beakers. A beginner microscope. A folded card with no signature, but I knew. Of course I knew. Micah had her eyes. And her stubbornness. At 2 he was sounding out anatomical terms with more precision than some interns I'd trained. Left atrium, he said once, pointing with a plastic bone. I froze mid-dish. I still wore scrubs sometimes, mostly to feel something familiar against my skin. But I wasn't working in an OR. Not yet. Instead, I stood in front of Zoom boards, walked Micah through Harvard Square in the afternoons, and taught him how leaves changed color while muting biotech calls. Janelle called it the comeback that smells like crayons and coffee. Michael, her cousin, a financial advisor, called it smart but surgical. He helped me build a portfolio, quietly buying into companies, including one that bore Ethan's name on every public statement. Shell funds. Trusts. Layers no one could trace back to me, but Micah's initials were there. At night, I'd read him stories. By day, I read quarterly reports. He liked Goodnight Moon. I liked acquisition data. We both liked order. And quiet. And patterns. Then came the invitation. A letter thick with gold embossing. You are cordially invited to speak at the 2023 Pediatric Innovation Benefit Gala, the keynote slot. The one they usually reserve for donors. But this year they chose a doctor, me. And across the invitation card, in a smaller line beneath the sponsor list, featuring Ethan S. Ward, executive donor and founding contributor. I stared at the RSVP for a long time. Micah spilled juice on the counter. I didn't flinch. He came over, patted my hand like he knew. You don't have to go, Mommy. He said it with a whisper. But his eyes held something sharp, like he understood legacy better than most adults. Vivian sent another package that week. This time it was legal. A notarized document. She had transferred her voting rights and shares directly to Micah. She never explained. Didn't have to. It was never about Ethan. Not really. It was about who would carry the name forward. And who deserved to. I wasn't sure what to wear. It had been years since I owned anything that wasn't machine washable. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to disappear. Let the gala shine. Let him smile for the cameras. I'll be the woman behind the podium holding a scalpel made of silence. I didn't need revenge. I needed visibility. 3 years ago, I was erased. Tonight, I'd be photographed. The Avalon Hotel glittered like something out of a politician's dream. A ballroom of glass chandeliers, floral towers, soft violin and soft power. Women in silk. Men in custom tailoring. Name tags that cost 5 figures. I walked in wearing emerald. Hair twisted clean. Heels that didn't hurt too much. Micah walked beside me, tiny and steady in his gray 3-piece suit. One hand in mine, the other holding a plastic dinosaur because he refused to leave it behind. Cameras turned. Someone whispered, "Is that Dr. Clarkson?" Another voice, "She's the one from the cardiac trial. The single mother." I didn't correct them. Let the assumption settle. Let the room read into the details I didn't say out loud. My son's name was printed on the gala's guest list. Right beside mine. Micah L. Clarkson. Not Ward. Across the ballroom I saw them. Ethan's hand on Lena's lower back, both laughing until he saw me. He froze. Not in rage. Not in regret. Just in disbelief. Micah tugged at my wrist. "Mommy," he said. "Is that the man from the photo?" My breath caught. I hadn't realized he'd seen it. I knelt beside him. "Maybe," I said. "Doesn't matter." And we kept walking. The strings shifted from Bach to something more modern. Servers swept past with champagne. Janelle appeared beside me like a soldier in heels, misty-eyed and proud. "You know he's sweating," she muttered. "You smell like arrival." I smiled. Only a little, then Vivian entered. No fanfare. No escort. Just a black evening gown, silver cuffs, and eyes like a woman who already knew the end of the story. She walked right past Ethan and Lena and knelt before Micah. "Look at you," she whispered, brushing imaginary lint from his lapel. "Ready for the world," Micah beamed. "Grandma Viv," he whispered. Vivian stood and took his hand. Led him across the room. Introduced him to board members, sponsors, professors, as if he belonged. Because he did. Ethan watched his mother walk away with a child he'd never claimed. And not a soul followed him. They called my name. Not with a drum roll. Just a gentle announcement through the overhead mic. "Please welcome Dr. Claire Clarkson, this year's keynote speaker." Janelle squeezed my hand. Micah looked up. "You ready, Mommy?" I wasn't. But I walked anyway. The stage lights were softer than I expected. Warm, almost forgiving. I stood behind the podium, cleared my throat, and saw the room blur slightly, not from nerves, but from knowing what this moment meant. "I want to talk," I began, "about forgetting. Not betrayal. Not erasure. Just forgetting. How systems forget women. Mothers. Caregivers. The ones who hold the bleeding and the bills. The ones who stitch hearts at work, then boil pasta one-handed at home." A quiet laugh rippled through the back rows. I continued. "There's no line item for resilience, no grant-labeled grief. But women build the bridges we walk across. We hold the silence when systems don't." I paused. And let it land. Then from the edge of the curtain Micah stepped forward. He walked calm and certain, holding a glass award plaque that was almost as big as his torso. The crowd turned, chairs shuffled. And then applause. Louder than I expected, longer than I could hold. Micah handed me the plaque, said, "You're the smartest person I know," and hugged my leg in front of 200 people. From the far side of the ballroom, Ethan stood still. He hadn't clapped, he hadn't moved. But he was watching. Then Micah did something I didn't expect. He turned, eyes calm, chin lifted, and looked straight at him. Not accusing, not angry, just there, present. Ethan looked away. That was all I needed. After the gala, people asked me for interviews, partnerships, photos with my son. I smiled, declined most. Went home early. I didn't need a headline. I had a home. Some victories don't sound like trumpets. They sound like little footsteps on marble floors and a man too ashamed to meet a child's eyes. 2 days after the gala, a manila envelope slid under my clinic door. No postage. No return address. No signature. I paused. Ran my thumb under the flap, expecting a cease and desist, or maybe a custody claim. But it wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Proposal for discretion, based equity participation. I blinked. The name at the bottom wasn't Ethan's. It was Lena's. Polished. Polite. Sickeningly clinical. She called it a strategic accord for reputational stability. I called it what it was. A bribe. I forwarded it to Janelle. 10 minutes later my phone buzzed. Her voice came through mid-rant. "This woman really said she'd offer you 2.5% to keep your mouth shut. Did she forget your son handed you an award while the board watched?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Janelle stayed up all night digging into bylaws. Michael looped in a legal contact in Manhattan. They didn't say it out loud, but we all knew something was shifting. Then came the second call. From a nurse. Private number, Miss Clarkson. "Vivian Caldwell's asked to see you. She says it's urgent." My breath stilled. My calendar emptied. The hospice room was soft, filtered sunlight, lavender and lemon on the air. Vivian looked smaller, her voice sharper. "I won't waste your time," she said, and motioned to the folder on her nightstand. Inside, transfer of voting rights. 18%, signed and notarized. "She'll challenge this," I whispered. Thinking of Lena. Of boardrooms. Of how men like Ethan never fall alone. Vivian nodded slowly. "She'll try," then paused. "My son built a company. I'm giving you a legacy." Micah was in the hallway, coloring. He didn't know what the paper meant. But one day he would. Vivian's eyes dimmed as I signed. But her lips curved like she had just checkmated someone without ever raising her voice. The boardroom sat on the 47th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Rain streaked the windows. Someone was pouring coffee. No one looked me in the eye yet. I wore gray. No earrings. Just a fountain pen in my pocket and a document portfolio that weighed more than a suitcase. Michael walked beside me. His tone crisp. Just read the proxy when they ask. That's it. I nodded. The meeting began. 11 men. 2 women. And Ethan seated at the head, still dressing like power hadn't shifted. He saw me, flickered, but didn't speak. Lena sat 2 seats away, tablet in hand, blazer sharp enough to cut tension. She smiled. Only with her teeth. First agenda item, quarterly loss projections. Second motion to nominate new interim leadership in response to ongoing reputational volatility, and then the chair turned to me. Dr. Clarkson, I believe you hold voting representation today. I stood. Unclipped the envelope. Slid out 2 notarized sheets. Claire Clarkson, I said. Voting 6% as individual stakeholder. And an additional 18% via proxy rights granted by Vivian Caldwell on behalf of my son Micah L. Clarkson. Silence. Then gasps. Then shifting chairs. Then Ethan pale. The vote was called. I voted. So did the room. Motion passed. Effective immediately, Ethan Ward was removed as CEO. Lena didn't stand. Didn't protest. She just looked at Ethan, then looked away. As I gathered my papers, Ethan reached across the table. Not to stop me, but maybe to find something to hold on to. His voice cracked clear. I didn't flinch. Didn't pause, didn't answer, just walked. Micah's name was now in the bylaws. The boy he didn't claim was now the reason he had no seat at the table. Some people lose with screaming. Ethan lost to a silent signature in a room full of men who finally looked at me and understood. Micah was sketching a ventricle diagram with a green marker and a piece of hotel stationery when the email pinged. He looked up at me, eyes wide. Mouth half full of apple slices. Mom. It says I got in. I took the tablet from his hands. Read the header again. Accepted pediatric genius track. Johns Hopkins Biomedical Initiative. Affiliate ID Clarkson Micah. Age 9. Outside, spring had come early, pink magnolias bursting across Boston Common. Inside, it smelled like printer ink and sunlight. I stared at him, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows and a whiteboard covered in equations he half understood but wouldn't stop trying to solve. I once told him, we build with what's left, even if what's left is broken. But he wasn't broken. He was light, unbothered, unburdened. The next morning we stood at the entrance of the newly unveiled Vivian Caldwell Pediatric Innovation Center. Her name was carved in brushed metal. Mine was on the grant. Micah's on the research wing. He was the youngest affiliate ever appointed. My speech was short, no flourishes, no buried knives. This center isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about believing what's young can also be brilliant. I looked at no one in particular, and everyone at once. Janelle cried. Michael smiled over Micah's patent paperwork. A nurse passed me a tissue and whispered, "There's a man outside asking to see you." I already knew who. Didn't flinch, didn't fumble. Outside, Ethan stood beneath the cherry blossoms. Older now, thinner. A scar above his brow I didn't recognize. He didn't ask for time, didn't beg, just held out a white envelope. "It's for him," he said. "When he's old enough." I took it. Didn't open it. Didn't ask. Back home, I placed it in Micah's hope chest right beneath his first Lego heart valve and the hospital badge I wore the night he was born. He never asked what was in the envelope. I never offered. We moved forward. Not because we forgave, but because we didn't need the weight anymore. Some stories end with a bang. Ours ended with a heartbeat and a door that never reopened. Micah never asked about the letter. And I never opened it. Some doors once closed in peace and love don't need to be reopened. Not everyone who hurt us needs to be punished. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing how to move forward quietly, steadily, and without looking back. We can't always choose what breaks, but we can choose how to rebuild with grace. If this story touched a memory or a quiet part of your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Leave a comment or share a story of your own. And if you're new here, stay a while. There's more truth healing and heartbeats ahead.